Call the meeting to order. Remember disclosure of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest at the proper time. Acknowledgement of ancestral lands. We acknowledge that the township of Warwick is located on the traditional lands of Anishinaabeg, as well as the many indigenous nations in Ontario whose footsteps have marked them for centuries. 5A, previous minutes of January 9th. Is there any errors or omissions? Motion, do we need a motion? No. Yeah, motion.
Make a motion.
Wayne Morris. Jerry Westgate, all in favor? Carried. Any business arising from the previous minutes? None seen. 7A, scheduled meetings and events. Basically for knowledge, I believe, or if there's any interest or any changes.
There is, thank you. There is a proposed meeting change to our annual calendar of meetings to accommodate for Easter Monday. We did not accommodate that in our annual calendar. So we propose moving the meeting from the scheduled Monday, which is Easter Monday, April 10th, to Tuesday in place of that holder on April 11th. If that were to be approved, we would need a motion. We would amend the calendar of meetings and then recirculate to council.
A motion to move that meeting. Jerry Westgate, Joe Manning, all in favor? Carried. Other meetings and events, Good Roads. There are smaller municipalities in Brant. Good Roads is in Toronto in April. Number 8A, council commitment dates. Does there anybody need to add anything there? Council items, verbal reports. Wayne.
Just want to thank Andrew for having the graders out this morning. They definitely needed it. I know it was a little wet, but I appreciate you having them out. Thank you.
Jerry, anything? No.
I have nothing.
Joe? No. On behalf of all the councillors, I'd like to just mention Emily Van Gorp and her Ice Ignite Synchro team. They traveled to Europe February 4th to compete. The team placed 5th in France and 2nd in Poland. So congratulations to their group. They were there for 12 days. Number 9, staff items. Amanda?
Thank you. So we added this verbal update to council just to draw your attention to the inclusion of a bylaw in the bylaw section of our meeting, just because it's not mentioned anywhere else on the agenda. So we have proposed a special agreement on a temporary patio with the Watford Legion. We did review the agreement that's included on the agenda with the Legion in advance. And the reasoning behind the agreement is just to help with their liquor licensing through the AGCO for their patio out back. So if council approves, we'll continue to work through that process to support the Legion.
Delegation of timed events. We're a little early, way early, so we'll carry on to 11A, accounts payable. Is there any questions in the accounts payable? I actually had one. It was regarding a tool purchase in December. It seemed like quite a large one. There was 2 of them. One was $49.82 and the other one was $24.70 or 97.
Part of the 2018-2022 strat plan included a refreshing of the tools and buying tools that were gapped. So every year we put in $5,000 per building location, and this was just a yearly allocation spent.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Anyone else? Joe? No. 12. Okay, we need a motion to approve the accounts. Wayne, seconder. Joe, all in favor? Carried. Now we'll go to 12. Constant agenda, receive and file unless anybody has any questions or concerns. 12, it's the consent agenda, the receive and file items, so quarterly status report. ELCC programming, public consultation. You want to go through them each one individually? I think unless everybody's not read them, so you're fine. Okay. I get a motion to receive and file.
I'll make that motion.
Joe,
I second that motion.
Wayne, all those in favor? Carried. 13A,
Excuse me, have we done 12D yet? The correspondence? Did I miss that? Sorry. Just a couple I wanted to mention. I noticed 2-25 is Rural Economic Development Grant. Are we going for anything there or?
We presently have a grant that we're working through this year. So the only project we have identified, we've got. This year, when we do the strat plan, it's going to trigger out the next round.
Okay.
So we'll go in for the fall application.
All right, thank you. The other one, I'd like to support 2-31 and 2-37. Like, haven't got my. Yeah, regarding the Board of Education to kick in a little bit for the election campaigns. $37, the Village of Point Edward. I'd like to support our local municipalities on the, I agree with the bail hearing one. So I'd make a motion to support both of those, please.
I get a seconder to that motion. Wayne, all those in favor? Carried. Or sorry, Jerry. Anything else? Nope.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, 13A, reports and items requiring a motion. Request changes to addressing requirements in Watford from Canada Post, that the Council of Township Warwick hereby requests that Canada Post adopt civic addressing for all addresses within the Township of Warwick, specifically in the urban boundary of Watford and former village of Watford. We need to do these all at once or separately? Separately. I have a motion to that effect. Wayne, Jerry, all in favor? Carried. 13B, the annual accessibility report. The Council of the Township of Warwick approves the Warwick Township's 2022 annual accessibility compliance report, and that the 2022 annual compliance report will be posted on the Township of Warwick website. Are there any questions to that motion?
Yes, Amanda, do all employees take the OADA training as required? They do? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions concerning the motion? I get somebody to make a motion. Joe, seconder. Wayne, all those in favor? Carried. 13C, establishing an ad hoc committee for the Watford 150th anniversary planning committee. Any questions or concerns with that motion? I get somebody to move. Wayne, and seconder. Jerry, all in favor? Carried. Item D, options for parking bylaw amendments to address the operational concerns. The Warwick Township Council approved the amendment of the Township of Warwick parking bylaw to remove the availability of on-street parking permits to come into effect in advance of the next winter control season, November 5th, 2023, and that the public notice of this bylaw amendment be communicated with all current permit holders proactively to support and pursuit of the individual alternative parking arrangements off-street during the winter seasons. Any questions or concerns?
Yeah, I have a question. Where do people park if they don't have a laneway? This is, there's some lots in Watford that don't have a laneway. And this is where they always park. They got a parking permit. So what are we doing for these people, and like, why are we changing it now?
Does anybody want to speak to that?
Thanks, Councillor Morris. So this proposed bylaw amendment came forward through our Public Works Department with some concerns related to winter control and parking on street. So there are limited numbers of properties without driveways currently in Watford. One of which I'm aware is a multi-residential site. So what we could do, if that was a concern to council, is do a review of the properties for each of our permit holders for this year and check to see if a parking bylaw amendment could be adopted to address those ones. The ones in I'm thinking of what is it? Victoria Street. There's some housing there, a multi-residential site where there isn't a parking lot. It triggered for me after this agenda was actually finalized. So we could look at the parking bylaw to make an exemption for like that portion in front of the building and could do so for any others that don't have on-street parking that we're aware of. So that would be maybe a proposed amendment to the resolution.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I just don't want to put a bylaw through and then these people have nowhere to park. I understand about parking on the one side of the street, but is it necessary to have both? I don't know. But I'd like you to get that information if you could and come back to us. Thank you.
Hi, Joe.
So with that too, would that include limited parking? Because some areas too have laneway space of like one vehicle and people nowadays tend to hold multiple vehicles. So I'd like to see with limited space too, that they have access to being permitted to park there.
Jerry, have anything?
Yeah, I think this was put in place quite a few years ago, mainly for the apartments. And I know the one apartment that was put in place for now, they have parking out in front. But we do have to do something. I know there's been a car on McGregor Street down by Joe that the plows had to go around for I don't know how long. They have lots of room in their driveway to park. And the other one is down on John Street, I guess it is, where they have a permit for that vehicle, but they do have lots of room to make a driveway or put it off the road there. I don't see why now if any place comes, they have to put the parking in our bylaws. So if they don't have parking, they should have parking. I don't think there's any place where they can't put a driveway in. And it does make quite a inconvenience, as I've noticed down on Victoria Place there, where the car's going around it and there's snow still piled up against the car.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Like, I think if they have parking available, they shouldn't have any necessity for permits at all. I'd just like to see that if there is a place that has very limited parking, I know some of the smaller lots have like room for one. And last thing we want to do is start and encourage people to start putting vehicles on the front lots and that too, right? So I just like to see that if they can prove limited parking, that then maybe permits are accessible, but without that proof, then obviously we move forward with no permit.
Just do you want to, we need to make them, we bring this back to council with changes, or we still need to vote on it today?
Totally up to council.
Did you put a motion to the?
I did really put a motion through, but I'd like maybe Amanda to come back or Andrew come back with the information. You know, there's only one or there's 10 or there's whatever, we could get a little more better handle on it. But I agree with Jerry. If they've got a space, use it.
We can just leave it as is, then, right?
I think we should send out a letter to the ones that have a permit this year and see if there's any reason or tell them that they may not be able to get a permit unless they have a really good reason for next year, and see what comes back to us. We don't have to make this decision today. We can make it 2 meetings from now and still make a decision then and see what the the ones that have permits now have to say.
Thanks, Councillor Westgate. So if that's the wish of council, might I suggest a motion to table this report, and we can bring it back with some additional information as requested after we contact the current permit holders to understand their situation and review their properties specifically, and report back to council.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I'll make that motion. I think there's only 12 people to contact anyway. So table the motion and bring it back.
I second that motion, John.
All in favor? Carried. Item E, council health benefit plan coverage. If council wishes to approve, I guess I have a question for Amanda. So I believe you told me if we have proof of insurance, we don't have to. Okay, I just want to clarify that. So are there any other questions or concerns? Motion? Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion towards that? Or not against or for, or discussion?
There is a need for it, like there has been a demand for it, I take it. Well, then I have no problem making the motion to accept it as long as as you said, John, we have the option to opt out if we already have benefits. I make that motion.
Seconder?
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor? Carried. F, proposed substance use policy. That the proposed policy on substance use will be approved and be added to the Township of Warwick Corporate Policy Manual. Any questions or concerns with that? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve. Jerry, seconded. Joe, all in favor? Carried. Item G, ice extension request. I'll let Ryan maybe speak to that.
Yes, thank you. I think a lot's been discussed within the report, but just to further upon the report, ice requests by the Watford Figure Skating Club to extend the season by 2 weeks. I think that, although there is some operational challenges to keeping our ice system in for 2 weeks, that has been identified in the report. We are confident that there is a number of user groups that could utilize the ice. I think it only really works for us if we can try and get a full program of ice, which we are confident that the community use will be there with this 2 week extension. I think doing it as a pilot project and not committing to it further than beyond this season, I think is ideal for us. We'll monitor it both on how the building and how the system handles the operations, as well as the usage. But I think obviously we'll leave that in council's hands to make that decision to extend.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan?
Yeah, Ryan, going forward, because this is gonna be a 1-year extension, going forward, are we gonna find out? They mentioned a lot of communication errors, which resulted in this. So can we figure out what those communication errors were so that it doesn't happen again? So next time, it's a matter of choice, not kind of pushed into a corner with them.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Manning. That's a fair point, and we'll continue with the communication efforts with all of our user groups and specifically the skating club as well, to ensure that we get our ice schedule buttoned up early in the season, to avoid any miscommunication and lost ice.
Any other questions for Ryan?
Just a comment, there's a lot of history behind all this. Years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, we made a deal with Alvixson that they would keep their ice in later and we would put it in early because they had the fair and stuff. That agreement, I don't think was ever really held to any place. So I have no problem with keeping it in for a couple of weeks, but it's nice that our local figure skaters and local hockey teams can get the ice time they want, but it cannot be all prime ice time for them. I guess we need to rent out and keep the arena full and use all the ice time we possibly can.
Yes, and just to add to that, Councillor Westgate, that's great points. Should we move forward with this 2 weeks, we'll be reaching out to all community user groups. Not only just here in Warwick Township, but on the neighboring communities as well, and start building out this program. I schedule the best that we can, trying to help and accommodate all groups. But you're right, there only is a certain number of primetime ice. So we'll have to be cognizant of that and work around that fact.
Any other comments? If not, I'll ask for a motion.
I make a motion, we extend the ice for 2 weeks for accommodating the figure skating club on a 1-year situation.
Seconder,
I second that motion.
Joe, all in favor? Carried. Item H, tennis court and adult fitness equipment capital project. Any questions to Ryan or Trevor regarding that? I think it's been passed in the budget, but
Just like to throw into the motion that it was a grant. Not because we're spending this money, this is a grant we received into the motion. So everybody knows that.
okay, any other questions, Jerry?
The color scheme, is red the color to go now with the tennis courts?
It's certainly an option. There's a number of colors that we can certainly choose from. The red and the black, just going with our Township of Warwick colors, was the reasoning behind that. But we are certainly open to suggestions, and we're early in the process in terms of picking the colors, and there's, as I mentioned, plenty of colors to choose from. But I do believe that the red and black will really make that space pop.
I don't know, I've played tennis on red and black before, and you seem to get more glare off of red and black, or I'm not. I don't know.
Is this a question we should be asking? Like tennis groups or whatever about, I know nothing about it, so I agree with Jerry. If it's gonna be more glare, the color is great, but if it isn't gonna work, I want it to be done right the first time.
Joe?
Sorry.
To kind of bank on those questions, like, is this motion gonna lock us in on this color scheme? Can we take that color scheme out of the motion for now and pass the rest of the motion without locking into a particular color scheme till we can decide?
Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Manning. Yeah, as I mentioned, the color scheme is certainly open. We are open and flexible to picking our colors. We'll have ample time before we have to lock in on the colors, I do believe. I do know that in talking with the contractor, the red and the black are both in stock and available, so there would be no issues on that front. But we are early enough in the process that we can certainly adjust the colors. I don't mind putting some other color options together, having those conversations with some of our pickleball and tennis users, and could also bring it back to our Parks and Recreation Committee to look at the color schemes and decide collectively through that platform as well.
Okay. Does anyone want to?
Make a motion that we go ahead with this and let Ryan and pickleball and rec committee make the decision on the color.
Seconder to that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Joe, all in favor? Carried. Just wanted to make sure we could do these tenders for the drains here. So I is the tender for the Gilland drain 2022. Tender recommendation, Gilland drain 2022 be awarded to Van Bree Drainage and Bulldozing Limited for a cost of $94,560.15 plus HST, providing there are no appeals. Ryan, do you need to, or sorry, Andrew, you need to speak to this at all or not?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Callenberg. Just not a lot to say about it, other than it was a competitive bid process and we had some fantastic prices with all these tenders. So it's good to see.
Any other questions for Andrew? No, we're gonna get a motion.
I'll make a motion to pass.
Joe, seconder. Jerry, all in favor? Carried. Now we'll do tender for Holbrook Fenner Drain 2022. Tender for the Holbrook Fenner Drain be awarded to Van Bree Drainage for a cost of $413,509 plus HST. Are there any comments, Andrew?
No comments.
Are there any questions for Andrew? If not, I'll look for a motion.
I do the motion for the Gillandry.
Wait, Holbrook,
Holbrook Gate Drain, sorry.
no problem. And a seconder.
I'll second that.
Joe, all in favor? Carried. And one last one. Two more. Award tender for the Kilmer Drain 2022. The tender for Kilmer Drain be awarded to Van Bree Drainage for a cost of $303,730 plus HST. Any comments on this one, Andrew?
No comments.
No questions for Andrew. I'll look for a motion to approve. Wayne and Jerry, all in favor, carried. The last one we have is award tender for Moffett Drain Branch 7. The tender for Moffett Drain Branch 7 be awarded to Bruce Pullen and Sons Trucking for a cost of $37,580 plus HST. Are there any comments from Andrew?
No comments.
Any questions for Andrew? If not, I'll look for a motion. Wayne, Joe, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Motion for action correspondence. Any questions regarding that correspondence? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to approve.
I think we need to approve it. It kind of goes on the same one as Point Edward does with the bail and that, and with repeat offenders. They can't keep just locking them up and letting them go the next day. We got to have some kind of justice. So I support the motion.
I have a seconder to that. Jerry, all those in favor? Carried. And that gets us to 3:58, and then we'll go back to the timed events at 4 o'clock. So we'll have to wait 2 minutes. Well, it's 4 o'clock. We'll get started with our first delegation consideration of drainage reports. Welcome, Mike. We're here to proceed with the consideration in the drainage report for the Wolvet Drain 2022. Any petitioner has the right to withdraw from the petition. Does anyone wish to withdraw? Any other owners in the area requiring drainage have the right to sign the petitions. Does anyone wish to sign the petition? If yes, they should make arrangements to sign the petition. Seeing none. Mike DeVos with Streets Association, will you please explain your report?
Okay, thank you. Glad to be in person.
Likewise.
Much better this week. Okay, there we go. Okay, the report before you was prepared in accordance with section 78 of the Drainage Act, which is repair and improvement to an existing municipal drain. The Wolvet Drain is a tile drain that was constructed in approximately 1962. And the landowners indicated that due to its age, condition, and size, they wished the drain to be replaced with a larger drain with catch basins to try and capture more surface water and bring it up to basically today's design standards. We are adding some larger berms to try and hold water back a little bit and prevent it from flowing downstream. They are referred to what's called WASCOBs. It's a relatively new acronym in the last several years. And we will be trying to seek some extra funding if it is available. The St. Clair Region Conservation Authority has recently acquired some more funding for projects such as this. So we're going to try to get some of that. But the project does receive a regular grant from OMAFRA. So regardless, everything that was prepared was without the extra grant, so there might be some extra help. And if so, that's great. If not, the drain will go ahead with the regular granting process. We are recommending to install about a little bit less than a kilometer of tile, ranging from 10-inch to 16-inch diameter pipe with some inlets for the surface water. And I stop and open up to questions.
Any questions for Mike? Andrew, Drainage Superintendent, do you have any comments?
I do not.
Seeing no questions, does anyone who is present wish to ask any questions or make any comments? If the report is approved, the bylaw will be given first and second reading later in this meeting. Since further investigation was required, the bylaws will not be passed in the since further investigation is required, it may not be passed. Thank you for attending. We'll finish that one. We don't need a motion, no.
No.
Procedures for quarter revision. Motion that Warwick Township Council proceed into quarter revision for the Gilliland Drain 2022 bylaw number 5 of 2023. I would also like to invite David Ferguson, appointed by Brooke Alvinston as the representative, to please join the quarter revision if he feels. Welcome, Dave. Okay. Got to get a motion to go into quarter revision. Wayne, Joe, in favor? Carried. Have any written appeals been received? Does anyone present have any verbal appeals? Does Andrew have any comments to make?
Not at this time.
Since there are no appeals filed, the following resolution is to be passed. Motion that the Court of Revision for the Gilliland Drain 2022 bylaw number 5 of 2023 will be closed without changes to the report, and we go back into open council. Can I get a motion? Wayne, Jerry, in favor, or carried? Thanks, Dave. I need a motion that Warwick Township Council proceed into quarter revision for the Holbrook Fenner Drain 2022 bylaw number 6 of 2023. Jerry, Joe, all in favor? Carried. Have any written appeals been received? Does anyone present have any verbal appeals? Andrew, have any comments to make?
No comments.
Which drain are you here for, Mike?
Kilmer better.
The Bullbrook Center? or- And Kilmer's next, so. Okay. Since there are no appeals filed, the following resolution is to be passed. The motion reads that the Court of Revision for the Holbrook Fenner Drain 2022 bylaw number 6 of 2023 be closed without changes to the report, and then we go back into open council and motion. Wayne, Jerry, all in favor? Carried. Need a motion to go that Warwick Township Council proceed into the Court of Revision for the Kilmer Drain 2022 bylaw number 7 of 2023. Can I get a motion? Joe, seconder Wayne, all in favor? Carried. Have any written appeals been received? Does anyone present have any verbal appeals? Andrew, any comments at this time?
No comments.
Since there are no appeals filed, the following resolution is to be passed. That the Court of Revision for the Kilmer Drain 2022 bylaw number 7 of 2023 be closed without changes to the report, and then we go back to open council. I'm gonna motion. Wayne, Jerry, all in favor? Carried. Last one. I need them. That Warwick Township Council proceed into the Court of Revision for the Moffett Drain Branch 7 2022 bylaw number 8 of 2023. So I'm gonna make that motion. Wayne or Jerry, sorry. Second or Joe. All in favor? Carried. Have any written appeals been received? Does anyone present have any verbal appeals? Andrew, any comments at this time?
No comments.
Since there are no appeals filed, the following resolution is to be passed. That the Court of Revision for the Moffett Drain Branch 7 2022 bylaw number 8 of 2023 be closed without changes to the report. Let me go back into open session. Can I get a motion? Joe, Wayne, all in favor? Carried. I believe that ends the drainage. Now I gotta figure out where we were. Thanks, Mike. Nice day for a drive.
New business or moving into? No, we are not. We have to wait.
Yeah, we have another delegation at 4:15, so we do have to wait. Next order is new business, but there's nothing there, so. Does anybody have new business? While we're waiting? Well, after that, it's closed meeting, so we got a couple more delegations though. Good afternoon, Daryl, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon.
Welcome to our council meeting, and you're with Watson Associates Economist, and take her away.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen, just take you through a brief presentation this afternoon. Just bear with me one moment. Okay, perfect. So can everyone see the slide deck? That's great.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So this afternoon, we're going to go through a brief presentation on the development charge background study process that we've undertaken to date. And this is the formal public meeting that's required under the Development Charges Act. And so I'll kind of step through, the purpose of the public meeting, a little bit about the study process and the timelines that we have been undertaken for the DC study, background study, and bylaw preparation. I'll kind of do a quick overview of development charges, what they are and how they're used. I'll do a brief presentation then on the proposed policies and development charges that we've calculated. And then as part of the public meeting process, there can be presentations from the public, and then happy to stay on and address any questions from council. And then subsequent to that, then we can formally conclude the public meeting. So as I mentioned, the public meeting is being held as it's a requirement of the Development Charges Act. So as part of the development charge background study public process, once we release the background study, there needs to be a minimum of 2 weeks before a public meeting is held. And then ultimately, there needs to be a minimum of 60 days from the date we release the background study to the public and put it on the website to the date that the council considers the bylaw for passage. And so in terms of the process we've undertaken, we started back kind of early 2021 through September 2022, undertaking the calculations, detailed meetings with township staff, and undertaking the policy review. There was a change to the legislation in November, and I'll touch on that a little bit, but I'm sure everyone's aware, Bill 23 was released. So we had to modify our draft report, and then we released the ultimate background study on December 22nd. The formal public meeting is, and I apologize, it says 2022, we're not going back in time. The public meeting is today, February 13th, 2023, and then the consideration of the bylaw will be on March 13th, 2023. So development charges are used for municipalities to recover the capital costs associated with growth in the township. And so we're going to have new residential development, new non-residential development come to the municipality. And because of that, you're going to need to build infrastructure, maybe some pipes, maybe expansions to roads, add turning lanes, etc. And so what development charges are used for is then to recover the capital costs to undertake those works. Now, these costs are in addition to what would normally be considered as part of a subdivision. So when a typical subdivision comes in, you can think of the perimeter of the subdivision, everything with inside, let's say the roads, the sidewalks, the water mains, wastewater mains, etc., internal to that subdivision are typically built and paid for by the developer of the subdivision. Development charges are really to bring that broader infrastructure or oversizing of infrastructure to service that new growth. And this municipalities are empowered to do this through the Development Charges Act. Now, in terms of the services we've looked at, the Development Charges Act lays out a number of services. And so what we've highlighted in orange is what we're looking at as part of this study. So water, wastewater, services related to a highway, which is really roads and public works, fire protection services, and parks and recreation services. I will note, this slide was prepared before, but housing services has now been removed as a DC eligible service. So in terms of changes to the legislation, there've actually been a number of recent changes over the last few years. So beginning in 2019, there were some changes to the legislation, which allowed certain types of development to pay in installment payments. And so rental housing and institutional developments pay their development charge over a 5-year period. And then there was also introduced this kind of DC rate freeze, as we like to call it, where the development charge that's calculated is frozen at the time the application is submitted, if an application proceeds through site plan or zoning bylaw amendment. And the intent of this was to give the developers some stability in terms of what the rate is going to be and help reflect any increases to the development charges that might happen throughout their application process. Now, you are allowed to impose interest on both the installment payments and the rate freeze, and that was all provided through some changes in 2019. Then in 2020, there was further kind of broader refinements to the legislation. They've listed out the eligible services rate in the Act now. And they've removed this mandatory 10% deduction that used to be required. In addition, this is the legislation that brought forward the rules under the Planning Act for municipalities to utilize community benefit charges. However, those have not been considered as part of this process. Minor changes as well provided some exemptions for universities and some additional administrative rules for the annual treasurer statement, where they have to report on the kind of inflows and outflows of the development charge reserve funds. Now, Bill 23, I'll spend just a little bit more time as it is recent. I know I touched on this at a previous council meeting, but I just wanted to briefly go over some of the changes that have impacted the calculations and the policies in the draft bylaw. So there's an additional residential unit exemption. So previously, if you had a single detached home, you could put up to 2 apartment units on that property. So either let's say in the basement, or you could put 1 apartment in the basement, 1 on a garage or in a garden suite, for example. They've expanded that now to apply to semi-detached homes as well as townhomes. There's some new statutory or mandatory exemptions. Affordable, attainable housing, and affordable housing as part of inclusionary zoning. I will note, however, those are not yet in force, and I'll kind of touch on that again in a couple slides. But those exemptions require further definition in the regulations to the Act, and we're anticipating those changes to be forthcoming. So until we get those provided definitions, these exemptions are not currently in force. However, the nonprofit housing exemption is in force. They've removed housing services from the Development Charges Act as an eligible service, as I mentioned. We've had to extend our historical level of service calculations. So if you're looking at the background study, Appendix B, will provide for our calculations that we've had to do. Previously, we had to look out 10 years. Now we've had to look out over 15 years. They've removed studies from being an eligible capital cost. So any growth-related studies, such as official plans or secondary plans, master plans, and including the development charge study, they've been removed from being eligible for recovery. They've instituted this mandatory phase-in. And so when we get to the calculated charges, I'll note how that impacts the charges. And essentially, in the first year of the bylaw, only 80% of the calculated charge may be imposed, then 85 in the second year, 90 in the third year, and so on, until you get to 100% of the charges in year 5. To that end, the development charge bylaws previously only had a life of 5 years, a maximum life. But these have now been extended to 10 years. So once the bylaw is considered, and if it's passed in March 2023, it'll be good until March 2033. Then we have the rental housing discount. So depending on the number of bedrooms, if you provide for rental housing, you get a discount of the DC based on those number of bedrooms. And then there's the maximum interest rate for those installment payments and the DC rate freeze I mentioned earlier. This has now been capped at 1% plus the average prime rate. And then lastly, there's a requirement to allocate the funds received. So at the beginning of every year, whatever the balance is, 60% of that balance needs to be allocated to specific projects for water, wastewater, and roads or services related to a highway. So looking at the methodology to calculating a DC, there's something like 60 or 70 clauses in the Development Charges Act, and then numerous years of cases through the Ontario Municipal Board, now called the Ontario Land Tribunal, which really guide the way that we undertake our calculations. If I was to sum it up in a few points, the first thing we have to do is identify the amount, type, and location of growth. So is it residential, non-residential type of development, how much, and where? The next thing to do is, once we know how we're growing, we need to identify what are the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. So for example, do I need recreation services to accommodate this new level of development? The third bullet there says we need to identify the specific capital cost or the project to provide those services to meet the needs for the growth. So again, we know for the growth, if we need to provide recreation services, then the specific capital project might be an expansion to a community center or an arena, for example. So once we go through each of the services, we identify all the capital projects and the associated costs. We must make a number of deductions. And so we have to deduct any amounts for grants, subsidies, or other contributions that the township knows that they're going to receive. We have to deduct any share of the costs that would be deemed to benefit existing development or the existing community. We have to keep in mind the level of service calculations in Appendix B provide for this maximum cap. And so if we exceed that cap, we have to make a deduction so that we're within those limitations. And then where applicable, so if you had a DC reserve fund balance, we would include that into the calculations. Ultimately, what we do is, once we have the capital costs, we make our deductions. We have a net cost that's related to growth. Then we allocate that between residential and non-residential benefit, and then divide that by the growth in each category to calculate the development charge. So very simply, we take all of the costs required to accommodate the growth, divide it by the growth that's going to benefit, and we end up with a residential development charge per unit and a non-residential development charge per square foot. So the Development Charges Act provides a number of mandatory exemptions, and these have been enhanced through the legislation as I've provided in the previous slides. And so the mandatory exemptions provide that upper tier, lower tier governments don't charge each other development charges, as well as the school boards. So if you were to build a facility, the upper tier wouldn't charge you a development charge, and vice versa. For industrial buildings can expand their footprint up to 50%, and they don't have to pay a development charge. Once they surpass the square feet of additional 50%, they would start paying development charges. As I mentioned before, you can add up to 2 apartments in a single detached, semi-detached, or row house, and that includes 1 in the house and 1 garden suite or apartment on a garage. For rental residential buildings, you could add up to 1 additional unit or 1% of the existing units, and you don't have to pay a DC. Universities are exempt. Nonprofit rental housing is exempt. There's a discount for rental units based on bedroom size. And then there's the mandatory phase-in of development charges. And as I noted, there's these proposed exemptions for affordable, attainable, and inclusionary zoning units. However, those are not yet in force. So beyond the mandatory exemptions that have to be provided, council does have the discretion to provide for additional exemptions. So you can reduce in part or in whole DCs for specific types or classes of development. So for example, all of industrial development or churches or places of worship. You can phase in the charge over time at a slower rate than the phase in provided for and the mandatory requirements. And then there's also redevelopment credits. So if I'm knocking down a single detached home and building 3 townhomes, I'll get a credit for a single detached home and only have to pay the difference between 3 townhomes and 1 single detached home. So the proposed discretionary exemptions included in the draft bylaw are places of worship, cemeteries, hospitals, non-residential farm buildings, and temporary buildings. And these are some of the most common exemptions that we see across the province. In addition, for the redevelopment credit that I just mentioned, municipalities include a time horizon on that. So we've included a 5-year sunset clause on that, which again is one of the most common terms used throughout the province. So when considering the exemptions at the bylaw passage next month, apologies, in March, one of the things to consider is this triangle. And so when we look at the capital costs, and this is the top bubble, the capital costs required to service new development, you can pay for that growth-related component through development charges. But if you don't use development charges, the money is going to come from somewhere. And so if it's water and wastewater infrastructure, that would come through water rates. Otherwise, it would come through taxes and or existing reserves. So in terms of the growth forecast that we're looking at for the background study, we're looking at a net population increase over the 10 years of just over 700 people. And a residential unit increase of about 286 units, with a non-residential floor space of just over 2.1 million square feet. And for the 15-year, we've looked at on the township-wide basis, which is the middle column, we're looking at 1,165 people. And for the urban area, which is the water wastewater area, looking at 1,200 people. It's about 462 units on the residential side. And then for the township wide, we're looking at just over 2.26 million square feet of non-residential floor space. And then in the urban area, that's at about 275,500 square feet. So in terms of the annual housing forecast, the black bars on the left denote the actual building permits over the last 10 years. And the red line provides for the average, and you can see it's been about 6-7 building permits or residential units per year over the last 10 years. On a go-forward basis, we're looking at an overall average of about 29 units per year, starting in 2022, going out to 2036. And you can see the dark blue bars denote the low density or the single semi-detached units. The light blue, that might be hard to see because they're rather small, but that would be your medium density, so your townhomes or row houses. And then the orange would be the high density or your apartments. In terms of the services I mentioned earlier, we're on a township-wide basis, we're looking at services related to a highway, so roads and public works, fire protection services, and parks and recreation services. On an urban area basis, we're looking at water and wastewater services. So in terms of the proposed development charges, in the rural area or the outside of the urban area, based on the services related to highway, fire, parks and recreation services. For a single detached home, the total proposed charge was calculated at $13,322. And when you add in the water and wastewater for the urban area, in total, it would be $23,685. Now, when we look at the bottom, what we've provided is what the first year charge would be, as you can only impose 80% of that calculated charge. So in the urban area, that 80% of the charge would be just under $19,000 per single detached home. What we've provided is the residential unit types, so other multiples being townhomes. So a fully urban serviced property would be $17,862 per unit. And then the first year would actually be $14,290. We go across, so we have the 2+ bedrooms, 1 bedrooms and bachelor units, and then the special care, special dwelling units. And then ultimately we have the non-residential per square foot charges of 57 cents in the rural area and $5.13 per square foot in the urban area. But 80% of that is 46 cents in the rural area and $4.10 in the urban area. So how does that compare to your neighboring municipalities? So what we've provided for here, you can see in the dark blue are all the municipality or the neighboring municipalities are in the area. And then in the teal color is the fully calculated charge at $23,685 per single detached unit. And then the 80% of that at $18,948 per unit. You can see that even with the fully calculated charge, you're at the upper end of the middle area of the comparators, just below Strathroy, Caradoc, and above North Middlesex. At 80% of that full charge, you're around basically the same charge as North Middlesex for a fully serviced urban area. I will note some municipalities such as Sarnia are currently looking at updating their development charge study, and I was actually on a council meeting earlier today speaking about the process, and they're looking to release the report in the coming months. In terms of the commercial development charges, again, we have $5.13, puts you in about the middle of the comparators, and 80% of that fully calculated charge just below the Grand Bend area of Lambton Shores and just above Adelaide Metcalfe. And I just note that Adelaide Metcalfe, those are the proposed calculated charges as they are also undergoing a development charge process at this time. And for the industrial rates, again, very similar picture, but just to note, some municipalities do exempt industrial development. You can see Lucan Biddulph and Plimpton, Wyoming only has a very minor charge, but ultimately still in kind of the middle of the comparators. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, the bylaw passage would be considered for March 13th, 2023, where council may consider the draft bylaw. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. Is there any questions from any of the councillors? Wayne?
Yeah, Daryl, I keep seeing all these studies and all these communities are bigger than we are. What is Brook Alvingston's development charge? Somebody that's comparable.
Through you, Mr. Barrett. So I think I would have to go back and look to see what if they have a development charge. I believe if they were not on the list, they probably don't have a development charge, but I would like to take that back if possible and provide a response through staff.
Thank you.
If I may, I'll take a crack at that. We are the only municipality in Southern Ontario on a 400 series of highway that does not have development charges. So our comparators, even though Daryl's given us neighboring municipalities, haven't given us a true measure along the 402, which is where I would have liked to have seen it. But that's what we should be looking at rather than those that don't have 400 access, in my opinion.
Jerry?
For a long time, the Warwick Council has stayed away from development charges. We thought development charges have a tendency to keep housing and industry out of places because it's more costly to come here. What's your thoughts on that? Are we going to lose residential? And this is just because of development charges?
Yeah, so through you, Ms. Ferry, so what we've seen in other jurisdictions is kind of varied approaches. So some councils like to discount or exempt completely development charges. But what we're seeing is with the increased pressure of construction costs, the increased requirement for asset management expenditures, ensuring that growth does pay their fair share of the development charges or their fair share of the capital costs is a sound financial approach. So I mean, it's one of those, if you, what we've seen through other competitiveness studies and such is it's not that big of an impetus to development. And if I may, if you look at the water and the wastewater development charges, in total, it's for a single detached home, it's about $10,363. So that's to get all the water to the house and the wastewater away from the house and treat it. If you were to build on a private system, I think your, a private cistern or well system and a septic would be much more than what the municipality would be charging through a development charge. So just to keep that into perspective.
Joe, do you have any comments or questions? No? Jerry?
On the water and wastewater, we do have connection fees and stuff that will I know they don't cover everything, but they do pretty well cover it. And Warwick is probably in a unique situation where we have another source of income where maybe we don't need development fees the same as other places. I just don't want to put development fees on and have people or residential or industrial stay away from Warwick because of them.
Wayne?
I agree with Jerry. That $10,000 a house you were talking to might be the difference between somebody that can afford it and can't afford it. We're looking at trying to find housing for people that that they can afford. To me, that just puts another price tag up there that may make them not be able to afford the house. I don't know if I agree with these development charges.
Joe?
Yeah, so looking at the graphs, I mean, there's a few townships obviously that are lower than ours, but the graphs don't speak to why they're lower than what you're proposing here. Is there a reason why theirs are significantly lower? Do you have that information?
So through you, Mr. Rivera, so there may be varied reasons for each of those municipalities, DCs being lower. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but there's when we look at the services that are included, there may be less services. But also when we're looking at what is the development charge versus what is a local service or part of the requirement of a subdivision, some municipalities do have a higher bar. So when developers come through with their subdivision plans, they might be required to in place more infrastructure than in another municipality where they might use development charges for more of the infrastructure. So for example, on when we take a subdivision, everything internal might be the developer's responsibility, but some jurisdictions say, okay, well, if you're going to connect that pipe, that water pipe to our existing system, even if you have to go 2 kilometers to do that, it's part of your cost as a developer. Some municipalities would rather put that into the development charges. So that might create a disparity as well between the charges imposed by other jurisdictions.
Well, thank you, Daryl, for your presentation. These guys have asked probably some of the same questions I was going to ask. So looks like we've got some things to think about, and thank you for your time today. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you, council.
Right on time. Inspector Chris Avery, come on up. Welcome.
All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you an update on some of the significant policing issues in Lambton County and some things that may also be relevant to you about policing in Warwick. So forgive me if I'm back to basics too much on you, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about in general. Most of you know that Lambton County OPP is responsible for providing policing service to all of Lambton County outside of the city of Sarnia, save the community of Kettle Point, which is policed by the Anishinaabe Police Service. We are also responsible for policing on Walpole Island First Nations territory in conjunction with the officers hired by that community. Many of you will know we have seasonal policing issues in Grand Bend and Ipperwash with alcohol-related offenses, assaults, sexual assaults, thefts, and last year even homicide, and so on. Petrolia is fairly consistent with calls for service, not having any major seasonal swings. As far as larger communities, we have a complement of specialty personnel in Lambton who complete a wide range of assignments that will complement our frontline service. And these specialty members include emergency response team, criminal investigation, traffic, technical traffic investigators, marine, scenes of crime officers, street crime and drugs, sexual assault registry, or sex offender registry, sorry. Domestic violence coordinator, mental health liaison officer, school resource officer, community services, media relations, and of course, the all important admin cadre that keeps the wheels on our bus and keeps us moving. Something that has been asked of other communities or from other communities is a little bit of information on the policing contract. So generally, we offer 3 to 6 year contracts from the OPP. That's the way it's always been. There's not an option for a 1-year contract. I don't really have an answer as to why, if you're wondering. It's what the way they do it. There's no cost saving by being in a contract or separating from the Lambton Group contract. Billing is the same no matter in or out. However, there are benefits to being in a contract. The first is civilian oversight through the Lambton Group Police Services Board. Their meetings are open to the public at any time, although we very seldom have people from the public attend. And the Police Services Board has open discussions about their concerns in the county, and they hear our concerns from the policing side as well. The second is that while in a contract, the municipality has access to the detachment enhancements and grant funding. We currently have grant funding for ride checks for the mental health nurse on our MHeart team. And we have successfully obtained a new grant request for sexual assault diversion for young offenders. There's legislation in the works that has changed the Police Service Board process. Those changes were slated to come into effect this year, and of course, it's not moving quickly. We have not been involved with that process, and I have limited communication on it. I'm not exactly sure what the board's going to look like in the end, but I'm told the billing model will stay the same with a base charge and additional charges for calls for service. So in general, Lambton, our detachment, has been very, very busy over the last while. The county itself has had we've actually 6 homicides over the last couple of years and other serious offenses, including missing persons, manslaughter investigations, and of course, sexual assaults. This year, we had a run of property crime offenses, with stolen vehicles, stolen tools, farm equipment. In recent years, there's been a renewed swell in the summer population of Grand Bend and Lambton Shores. COVID wasn't any help to us because they stayed open when others were not. We had a new population that seems to have discovered the shores of Lambton County, and our traditional draw was generally London, Kitchener, and a little bit of Windsor. There's more from Windsor, there's more from the Golden Horseshoe and from Metro Toronto that now come to Grand Bend. We've had some discussions about the increased violence there. The restrictions have caused from COVID-19 caused people to actively seek recreation and holiday destinations. And with the communities that are now coming to visit, we are seeing a more diverse population that comes to visit in Grand Bend and Lambton Shores area. We've recorded a lot of greater violence and an upsurge in our calls for service there. We're having an escalation of serious assaults and weapons offenses. And last year, I mentioned briefly, we had a murder in right before the May long weekend in Grand Bend. And we're seeing that some of the people that come from away, for lack of a better term, are bringing prejudices from their home area. So if we have rival street gangs that are coming, they'll be walking down one side of the street and the other group will be on the other side. That can be a cause of some conflict and violence. We're seeing a trend in violence, not only among the public, but of course towards us. We've had some swarming events where we've had to arrest some people, and their crowds come to try and take their friends back. Not that that's anything new, but it's different when you have a bigger crowd. We arrested everyone we had equipment for and got them back to the cells. And the other people that needed to be arrested but weren't really all that interested in participating at the time we didn't have equipment were kind enough to come back and try and kick in our steel door. So there was a short trip from the door to the cells. So we're coping with that, but it's been busy. We're seeing over the last 5 years in that area, we're seeing an increase in calls for service around 10% annually. And that's been an ongoing trend. I've made a proposal to West Region Command, and I don't see the other municipalities paying for Lambton Shores issues. I just think it's something you should be aware of. So our command staff is developing. I proposed a strategy to get extra bodies there so that the other parts of the county still maintain service. We've got things like that going on, and we've got people that are in trouble. Of course, we need to send resources up. When I send resources to that geography, which is in our far northeast, depending on how you look at the direction, it leaves the more southern and western parts of the county open, and I'm not happy with that. But any overtime or any resources we used to address those things will be scored to Grand Bend, Lambton Shores, and will not affect the other communities to see an increase in their funding. So I looked at some calls for service trends in Warwick, and I'm glad to report that everything looks fairly stable in your municipality. In 2022, there were 469 occurrences in Warwick. That's not year in total. I pulled that data earlier when we talked about coming before. And so that's up till the end of November. So I looked at what the top 10 calls for service were for this municipality. And the top one is property checks. And those are generally proactive on the part of our people, where they're out and about and checking doors and checking businesses to make sure that things are secure. Traffic enforcement was second. Community services calls, and those can cover a whole basket full of things. If somebody from the community calls, there's not really an offense, but people need some assistance from the police, that could fall under community service. Next was ambulance assist calls. We had ride next, an e-ticket, which is like enforcement, traffic enforcement. But we've got a new, there are old guys like me that write tickets by hand on paper, but the younger, newer people Apparently there's a computer in the car that they can manage the print set for them. Don't ask me how it works. Next was family disputes, traffic complaints, neighbor disputes, and person well-being checks. So I think those calls for service, and it's not a large number, and I'm not seeing the big ticket sexual assaults or big family domestic violence, murders, manslaughters, or anything like that in there. The other thing that I thought you might be interested in is talking about thefts and break and enters. Everybody's always interested in those. So we had 5 theft occurrences in Warwick and 2 break and enters. I thought that's pretty good stats. And 3 assaults. Again, that's pretty good stats. One of the more relevant things we have are Mental Health Act calls. They're increasing in all of our communities, and it's our top reactive call for service. And looking at 2022, Warwick had 8. So again, not so bad. When I look at this, I think that a little bit of an infomercial. I think that some of this mental health stuff comes from drug use. We're seeing a lot of huge drug use in the county involving fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine's on the comeback trail. And of course, marijuana has been legalized. What we're seeing is that studies have shown that usage of cannabis, specifically by young people, can cause the development of schizophrenia and mental illness. And I know that there are some that I know that I've talked to, and one young fellow is now dead, but he started smoking weed at a very young age. And by the time he was 19 or 20, he developed schizophrenia. That the figure came from the weed or marijuana. And he was taking OxyContin to slow down his thought process. It helped him control his thoughts, which is bad because that is a dependency-inducing drug. And yet, when you can't get it, it turns you nothing. It's the same thing as being a heroin addict. So there are many pressures in life, and COVID has increased that. Even though COVID, I like to think of as in the rearview mirror, but I think we're still suffering some of the effects of that. These pressures can spark usage of the illicit substances, and some that are now legal. And I think that the usage of marijuana and opiates can be contributory to the greatest increase in our occurrence types, which are Mental Health Act calls. So for those that don't know, we have grant funding secured for, my favorite term is MHEART. It's a mental health team. They've changed the branding on it. So if you hear MHEART or MCERT, somebody from away thought it was a good idea to rename it. We were one of the first ones to have it. I liked our old name, but they want to make it the Mobile Crisis Response Team. So we have officers that are designated that ride with a Mental Health Act nurse. And they will attend calls for service and help diffuse situations, or if someone in the community has a question that's mental health related, we send those teams out. We're partnered with Blue Water Health and CMHA, the Canadian Mental Health Association. We find that these teams have been instrumental in helping us manage the individuals we have. If our apprehensions are down, we're able to generally divert calls, or often able to divert them. I shouldn't say generally, but if we end up at the hospital with one of these people waiting to be seen by the doctor and emerge, used to be we were there for 6 or 7 hours. Now we're in and out, and I think it's less than 2, and that's a long wait. Currently, we have 2 registered nurse clinicians, and we recently hired a master of social work, and our goal is to try and hire 2 more nurses out of this government funding that comes from a grant. So this multidisciplinary team, it's my hope that we'll be able to have 24/7 coverage. Right now, we don't have that because we only have 2 nurses, but we're trying to expand what we have to improve that service. The actions of the MHEART team have resulted in effective actions. We're having fewer persons be released as well when we get them to the hospital. The nurse gives, if we show up to a mental health act call and someone says, I'm going to kill myself, our people are going to have to say, there's a big liability to this. You have to go to the hospital. And then many times the doctor will say, yeah, nice you brought them in, but no, we don't need to. and release them. We're having less people get released when we spend the time to get them to the hospital because of the nurse being involved. So 26% before commencing this program in 2019, admission times in Blue Water Health were averaging 7 hours without the nurse. We're 20 minutes or less without the nurse when we're with the nurse, and we're averaging 2 hours if we don't have a nurse working. So it really is one of those productive programs. And we met with Canadian Mental Health last week. They're committed to this program, and we're pursuing to have the government give us funding to continue it. And I'm trying to, my supervisor's coming tomorrow. We're going to have discussions about whether or not the OPP is going to get out money to be able to keep this alive if the grant funding folds up. Property crimes. We've seen mischiefs, thefts, and related occurrence being problematic in Warwick in the past. Many of these occurrences are related to mental health and substance abuse issues, but the stats are showing that is on the decline. So I think Warwick overall, again, is doing well. The 2 break-ins that were reported in Warwick last year, offenders generally don't commit these offenses while police are present and watching. They wait for us to be busy with something else. We've seen people that they know that if we're down and we're doing property checks, if I check Amanda's house, I'm going to check Amanda's house, and then I'm going to go to your house, and I'm going to go to someone else's house. And they know that once they see us check somewhere, if they're being vigilant about it, they know that they've got an hour or two before we probably make our way back to check the same place again. So uniform presence will generally dissuade most offenders from their deeds, but nobody does things when there's a marked police car present, but we can't have a car in every area at all times to stand guard. Something that we're finding with break and enters is that we're finding people, especially if they're not experiencing a lot of these occurrences, people will be lax in reporting it. Well, we haven't had many break-ins, or seems to be an isolated thing, and they'll call us, but they'll call us late. The sooner we know, of course, the sooner we can see if there's evidence at the scene. And we had a property offender that was out on a spree, and we were recovering stuff generally within hours. We were close enough behind him. So we're glad to recover the property if we can, rather than have it be missing. If maybe we find something and then we don't find out about the theft until a week or so later. Something I wanted to mention, in case it's helpful to the municipality, is focus patrols. We've been using focus patrols to address concerns brought to us by the county and by other municipalities. We had one last year in Warwick at the fire hall when the blockade was on. We were having some issues there, and we had a focus patrol in that area. Some other examples, we had some property crimes. Again, this individual that was causing us grief in the south end of the county, we had a specific patrol for that. And we had one in Petrolia. They had, just for example, there are several people that complain about traffic concerns there, but we had one on Tallyard Road in Glenview that led to 10 occurrences and 4 charges and a bunch of warnings. So it's good for the community because they're not everybody's getting a ticket, but everybody's getting talked to if they're a violator. These initiatives go on our shift briefings and remind our officers when they're not busy with calls for service. These are opportunities for proactive enforcement, and we log time so that we know who's where and when, and so we find those to be helpful. We've not been hearing about crime issues in Warwick or Watford. I see very few trouble with youth calls. I think we had 9 last year, or mischief calls, 4, unlike in other municipalities. I know when I was here a long time ago, when I was on the front line as a constable, we had a lot of those calls, but it didn't seem that we have those anymore. And I think overall things in Warwick and Watford seem stable. And if there are concerns that you see that you would like to have addressed, we're always open to receiving them and collaborating with you. So that's what I have brought for you folks. If you have questions, I'd be glad to answer them if I can.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I guess I have one question. Had a few questions from residents regarding some homelessness going on in our community. I haven't seen it personally, but just I don't, do we need to be concerned or let you guys know? Because it could be properties that people own but don't actually live in the community that they're banking or using for space, I guess.
I don't know about being concerned. I guess that depends on the people. Homelessness is alive and well in the county. I find I don't see it either, but I'm told there's quite a homeless community in Petrolia, and they're actually bringing a food truck out into the flats where they're going to CMHA is coordinating that. So I guess maybe they might get a count on that. I don't know. I haven't heard about problems. Again, our stats don't show that you have problems with that population.
That was just brought to my attention last week and it's one incident. So, I mean, I've heard nothing bad or anything has happened. I just said, look into it, but thank you.
I think you're doing a fine job in the community. In fact, I did have an officer show me how she could produce a ticket off the computer the other day. It was nice for her to show me how she could do that so easy. Grand Bend, when I was many years ago, when I was younger and out around Grand Bend and the lake, they always had I don't know how many officers come in the summertime to patrol the Grand Bend area. Does that not happen anymore? There used to be a detachment right there.
Well, there is still a detachment there. We use it as a reporting location. We use it year round. And it is downtown. We're probably the same location where you're thinking of. But the quick answer is no, we do not have a summer detachment any longer. And I remember those days, and we were effective in those days. And I tried to explain to my command staff that when we have those regular people in, they know the community knows them. I find that incredibly invaluable. Our people that are up there all the time, that report there and work that zone, they are known. And it's good to have, even in the summer, with the whole interaction, because there's so much going on. The locals get to know the local police and the police get to know them, and it's very effective. And I have tried to sell that, but there is not an appetite from beyond me. They're having a meeting with me, I think next week or the week after, about some creative solutions they have, because the last couple of years we've been staffing it with overtime and with our zone officers. So I have repeatedly asked for a summer detachment back, and that has not been granted to me.
Well, I think it's needed there.
Joe?
And that kind of bleeds into the question I have. You mentioned increased activity in Grand Bend in the last couple of years due to COVID. Do you anticipate that in the near future? And if so, are you guys going to do anything to address that so that it doesn't affect your contract with like the outlying small municipalities?
I'm absolutely expecting it's going to be busier. We've been seeing an increase, as I said, 10% per year for the last 5 years. And I haven't been up recently, but I'm told that the new there's like an apartment that's going to be Airbnbs. It's right on the main street. It's going to provide extra housing for more people to come. So I expect that we are going to be busy, and it's going to be a busy summer. So again, I don't think any of this funding that we're spending in Grand Bend is going to fall out on any of the municipalities. The people that come there know there's a code that they use, that they enter, that delineates where they work, and that goes to Lambton Shores for payment. Doesn't affect your cost for service.
Thank you. So I understand, like you mentioned, it doesn't affect our funding, but what about the accessibility of your ability to be able to patrol in the other areas and that? Are you going to increase your staff or?
So yeah, I won't talk specific numbers with you, but I've asked, what we have done is have a substantial number of people that are in on overtime, and they report to Grand Bend, and their job is to police Grand Bend. So the people, again, that Grand Bend or Lambton Shores are paying for, they are focused on that area. I'd like to, if some of our regular Grand Bend people are in on overtime, I would have them there, but I would have sufficient officers to police the rest of the zone. and the other zones, Warwick, St. Clair, and Enniskillen, they would all have their regular complement. So everybody gets serviced. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wayne?
Yeah, this is a kind of a curiosity question. I've been asked by a few people. As you know, we have a new roundabout out here, and I've been asked, do we need to use signal lights on a roundabout? And I said, I have no idea, but I'll find out.
So the quick and easy answer to that is the movement of your vehicle going to affect someone else? And if it's going to affect someone else, you have to signal. So if you're back in the boondocks and you're at a stop sign and you don't see any other cars, you're not affecting anyone, you don't have to signal. But if someone's there and your movement might affect them, you have to signal.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Questions? I don't. I want to, on behalf of council, thank you, Chris, for taking the time to come out and tell us what's going on in Lambton County and specifically Warwick, and thank you for your time. I guess we move into our closed meeting session now. See you, Dave. Thanks for coming. Motion to move into camera, meeting of council pursuant to section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended for the following reasons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's all of them. Can I have a motion to go into camera? Wayne, Joe, all in favor? Carried.
Gonna close for the YouTube, so.
At this time, we'll be closing the YouTube session to go into camera. Thank you for attending.